Part 4, the first Alcibiades. Socrates gives a proof of the fact that your body is not part of you, which is all kinds of a fun idea. So his point, what he's getting at, is he wants to convince Alcibiades that the importance of the soul, and that the soul is where you ought to you want to concentrate all of your real attention to the soul, because that's the true self, and it's the true self that is you. And so if you're trying to improve yourself, it's the soul that you need to be improving. And he proves this, in whatever way. There is a problem with the proof, and it's something that Aristotle actually will point out. So Aristotle doesn't believe this. Plato does. Generally, Plato is fully sold on the idea that the soul is the true self, the body is just a vehicle for the soul. Aristotle is unconvinced. Aristotle says that the body is just as much part of the person as the soul is, and that the body is the matter and the soul is the form of the person. I side with Aristotle on this one. And I think Socrates' proof more or less hinges on the person who does something is not the same as the tools that are used to do the thing. We can all agree with that. A carpenter and a saw are cutting some wood. What's cutting the wood? Well, it's the saw. What else is cutting the wood? It's the carpenter. And in what way are the carpenter and the saw interacting? The carpenter is using the saw. The carpenter is not the saw, because the carpenter uses the saw, and you don't use yourself, you use a tool, and a tool and you are not the same. Well, he gets Alcibiades to go further and say the carpenter also uses his hands, and he uses his eyes to see, and he uses his ears to hear. And so Socrates says, you say that he uses a saw, and that the saw is not part of him because it is the tool used by him. And you say that he uses his hands, and his eyes, and his ears. Are not they also tools that he uses, and are therefore not him? And then he says, but what does drive the motion of the hands, and the eyes, and the ears? And there, Alcibiades says, the soul. And so Socrates says, if you say that the person uses the hands, and the soul is that which drives the hands, then the soul must be the person. And the hand can't, because you cannot use yourself. You and the tool must be two separate things. And Alcibiades agrees. And we move on from there. And that's where Socrates proves that the body is not part of you. It's just the soul. Aristotle disagrees with this, and I think Aristotle points out, rightfully, a problem. A carpenter does not use his hand in the same way that he uses a saw. And it's precisely because the saw is alienable. He could lose the saw. The hand, if you lose your hand, everyone recognizes that that's very different than losing a saw. The hand really is part of you, and irreplaceably part of you. And Aristotle will go on to say, you're just because you've used the word use doesn't mean it's the same concept. It's just the same word. And we can't always rely on language to be a 100% accurate portrayal of reality. And so Aristotle would say that that's the fallacy of equivocation. You're using the same term in two different ways, but you're claiming that because it's the same term, it's only being used the one way. It can only be used one way because it's the same term. Therefore, the way I use a saw, the way I use the hand, must be the same because I use the same word. That's not true. You can use things in very different ways. The way that you, put it this way, the way that you use a ruler and the way that you use math is very different. A ruler is a physical object and math is a non-physical concept. Clearly, there are similarities, obviously, that are between the two terms. But it's also different. I don't use math the same way I use a ruler. And I certainly don't use them the same way I use myself, my own body, parts of my body. Aristotle will go on to say a whole can use its parts. It is often said that a whole uses its parts. A plane uses its wings to fly. The whole plane flies, but it's the wings that provide the necessary air currents and things that change the pressure that allows it to fly. And so we say that the plane uses its wings, though we would of course say that the wings are part of the plane. And so in that way, a human uses his eyes and his hands and his ears, and yet those remain part of him. You cannot use your whole. A plane does not use a plane. It doesn't use itself. But a whole can use its parts. And it uses them differently than it uses external things. So while I would agree with Plato that the soul, and Aristotle, that the soul is, higher than the body, more important, I don't know if that's the term I want to use. I think that's got the wrong connotations. But it's certainly higher. It certainly has preeminence, as it's the form of the body. And the form of something always has preeminence of the matter, because the matter is interchangeable, the form is not. And so I can eat things, I can take in different atoms and incorporate them into my body, and I can even lose atoms by losing them off the body, and yet remain me. Whereas my soul is undivided. It doesn't come in parts. My body has parts. My soul does not have parts because it has matter. And matter is what allows distinction into parts. And so the whole soul resides in the whole body and is undivided. And so in that way the soul is simpler and has preeminence because it's what causes me to be me. If I didn't have a soul, I would just be a random clump of cells and matter that just happens to be doing things. But the soul is what gives me personhood and identity and that sort of thing. So there's preeminence, and the care of the soul involves the care of the body and presupposes the right use of the body and things like that. You can't be taking care of your soul if you are harming your body. And harming your body harms your soul, in the same way. And harming your soul harms your body. If you are making yourself, worse as a person, then you're not going to be taking care of your body very well. Because a good person takes care of them. A good person does good things, and a worse person does worse things. And so if you're making yourself as good as possible, that presupposes the result being not only that you're doing good things all over the place, but one of those consequences would be the care of the body. And so this is one little area in Plato that I think Aristotle improves on. Well, Aristotle's very much, in the footsteps of Plato, and a Platonist in comparison to modern philosophy, which is so wildly different. This is one of the areas where I think Aristotle really does show a true improvement on Plato, and it's worth holding Aristotle's conclusion in difference than holding Plato's conclusion. So that's part 4. Thanks so much for joining me in this series on Plato's Dialogues. If you'd like to see the previous video in the series, click up here. If you want to see the next video in this series, click over there. And if you want to see more content like this, go ahead and click subscribe.